So this is hacking into the mainframe and other security stuff, but mostly other security stuff. Actually, just another thing is if there's a question in the chat, someone could unmute themselves and mention it, because I can't see it. Sorry. So I guess, who am I? I didn't actually put my name on this slide, but I'm Mickey. I don't work for Deloitte. There was some slight confusion with the announcement, but I am one of the HackerU R&D co-directors. So HackerU is a hackathon at Rutgers. It's still happening. It's going to be remote this year, and the site's live, so you can check it out. Hopefully, it'll be fun. I also work for Rutgers through OSS. And I guess if you're interested in stuff more about deployment and production environments and potential opportunities and talking to other people who work at OSS, student workers, come next week. And I'm also someone who's pretty interested in security. There's a security club, which at one point was ran by someone, I think, named Mickey, but was not me. So there's some extra confusion. But yeah, I'm unfortunately not part of it because there's already a lot of stuff I gotta do, and I am a human college student. So anyways, quick thing about ethics before we get directly into stuff. Obviously, don't hack other people's stuff without their permission. It is not only unethical, but it's also a federal offense, and you can go to jail. That being said, you can always hack your own stuff, which is very fun to just play around and see, where the holes and things are. And there's also companies like Facebook and Google, and a lot of big companies actually have bug bounties out. So you can play around with their stuff. They have specific rules to the extent, I think, but if you find a bug or a security flaw in their stuff, then you can get paid by them, which is pretty great. This isn't strictly ethics, but please don't sue me. I'm not responsible for what you do with this information. And obviously, if you do find out cool things and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited, please let vendors or companies know and tell them privately in a responsible fashion. Because it can be exciting, but if you just post it out to the internet, then malicious people might use it for the wrong reasons. So I guess here are some of the security basics. I forget who said this, but there's 3 critical rules. Don't own a computer, do not turn it on, and for the love of God, do not plug it into the internet. So that's the end of my talk. No, I'm kidding. But that is funny, but there is some truth to it. With computers, they're very complicated and there's lots of code. And it's impossible to know what all of that code does. Like Linux has millions of lines of code, and Windows has like hundreds of millions of lines of code, or something like that. And there's just simply too much code to understand. And by turning on, you're kind of implicitly trusting the people who've written this software that they have your best interests in mind, or they're trying to help you out, and they're not like doing bad things. And it's important because you can have absolute security if you don't use a computer. But by adding a little bit of weakness and, trusting other people, I guess, you can do amazing things with computers. And the internet escalates this. You get, the the all of the knowledge throughout the world, but now all of the mean people throughout the world can contact you. um, and you'd be surprised. I had a job where I was doing security stuff, and I was like, you know, I don't think this thing can be exploited. And someone literally told me, like, you really got to put on your tinfoil hat. There's all kinds of ways that people can exploit things. So some there's a few properties that you can associate with a secure sort of environment or with sending someone a message. And we use the magic CIA acronym because we know that they're listening. So C is for confidentiality. This is, you don't want the bad guys to know your secrets, but you want, you know, people you're working with to be able to get the information they need. And integrity, this is like you don't want your information or your message to be tampered with. And availability, you want to be able to access your information. And vulnerabilities can compromise any of these properties and kind of disrupt your ability to use the software or allow a malicious person to use the software in a way that isn't good for you. But another huge way where flaws can or vulnerabilities can come from is flaws or bugs in software or like in the design of the software. Um, Before we get into specific vulnerabilities, I wanted to talk about a few random other concepts. Um, you might be familiar with auth related stuff, but so that breaks down into authorization and authentication, which sound very similar, but they actually mean two different things. So authentication is making sure the message is authentic. So like um, basically like you can use a username and a password to log into Facebook, and since you have the secret password, Facebook definitely knows that it's you. Authorization is a little bit different. It's saying, we know who you are, but are you even allowed to do that? So, for example, uh, in Facebook, you can hide certain personal information, or you can only post something where a few specific people can see it, and those people are authorized to see it. Um, there's two different major ways authorization can work. There's role-based access control and access control lists. So basically, with role-based access control, or just roles, you can say, oh, this person is an admin, and admins are allowed to do all these things. And with ACLs, it's slightly more granular, I guess. And you say there's this specific list of people who are allowed to do this. So, you know, there's some pros and cons to them. With ACLs, um, it can be a bit more granular. So, for example, for Google Docs, you don't want to have to create a role for every single document and then add people to the role just so they can see that one document. So ACLs can be very, very flexible. But if you have some kind of system where you have a bunch of privileged people like admins that should be able to do a set specific amount of things, then role-based access control can be a bit easier. There's also two different perspectives in security. There's this idea of blue team and red team. So blue team is sort of the people who are trying to build the fort and make sure it's secure. And the red team are the people who are trying to hack and get into stuff. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like the red team is adversarial or the bad guys, because a lot of people in the security industry actually, you can get paid to be in a company and try to break into the company's stuff to prove whether or not it's vulnerable, or try to find vulnerabilities and then patch them. And so blue team stuff is very important. This can be stuff like firewalls, so you can just prevent, if someone keeps trying to access your system in a suspicious way, you can just block them on the firewall and they can no longer access your website or whatever. And there's all sorts of things you can do to harden your defenses. But this talk, the title is Hacking into the Mainframe, so we're going to focus on more red team related stuff. Okay. So now that we got some of the boring basics over, I can go more into the fun stuff, which is actual vulnerabilities. And you'd be surprised at how easy it can actually be to break into things. Some of the most common attacks are not even like related to any code, and there's not much you can really do to fix them. Like, for example, weak passwords. So if you use the password, that's going to be the first one that the hacker can guess, and you can guess common passwords and try to log into systems. And it's not necessarily just like, your aunt can't remember her password, so she set her password as password. You can even see these with like manufacturers, like like security cameras. A lot of times security cameras are connected to the internet, and if you have a system that you can access remotely and it's got a password on it, chances are it's set to the default password, and you can just go look it up on Google and access the system. There's also phishing, which is also not related to writing code. And basically, phishing is you set up like a fake login page and say like, oh, you got 12 new beans. Please log in to check out your bean account or whatever. And it's a fake email that actually goes to your fake login page, and then you can collect their login credentials to be used later. One of the defenses against this is things like two-factor authentication. So you may have seen like some websites, when you log in, they'll text you a code and have you enter the code into the website. And there was actually a case with, I forget if it actually happened or if it was like research, but I think it was the Oscars or something. They had a system, and I think it was basically this demo. What happened is they had a normal phishing page, but they also just triggered the system to push through and send you the code. So they kind of like logged in like normally with their script or whatever in an automated fashion, so that it would trigger the code, and then you would send them the code through their fake page, and be able to log in. So it's not a complete silver bullet, but one of the huge differences is with 2FA, you can with 2FA, they need the code every single time in order to log into the system, whereas without the 2FA, they can just hang on to the password forever and be able to log in until you reset it. The other huge thing that I'm going to talk about more later is unpatched software. And, you don't necessarily need to be incredibly smart and dig through things and climb through the code to be able to find vulnerabilities. Sometimes you can just find a system that has, it says, oh, we're running X version of WordPress. You can actually go ahead and look up that specific WordPress and see if anyone else has found any vulnerabilities for it. Actually, let me speed through here. Yeah. And so here's sort of like an example. If you run to like any random website, and if you want to see if it's a WordPress website, you can just type in and see if there's this wplogin.php or wp-admin folder. And then you get this page that says WordPress on it. And in this example, it doesn't actually have the version number, but here you've basically gathered this information that it's actually running WordPress. And if you had the version number 2, you can just go to Google and look up for things called CVEs, which is common vulnerabilities and exposures. So I guess here's sort of an example is, this process of just looking up known vulnerabilities works because people are lazy and don't really want to update their software. So like, here's an example of a table with a bunch of common WordPress versions, and you can see all these people are running software that's known to be vulnerable. And so this idea to make security research easier, what happens when someone discovers a vulnerability, it's assigned a magic number, like this one. So this is CVE 2008, which is the year it was found, and then just a sequential number. And you can get some information about this specific vulnerability. You can see like it's got a score of how bad the vulnerability is. And you can see like whether or not it compromises confidentiality, integrity, or availability, and a bunch of other things. And sometimes you can even find scripts on the internet for that specific vulnerability. Here's another example. The max score is 10, and this is the first time I've ever actually seen a score of 10 for a vulnerability. And you can even go and see like, oh, which versions of WordPress down below. You can see which versions of WordPress are vulnerable to this. And so back to this point here is, I guess, for blue team people, upgrading your stuff, as soon as patches come out is really important. And that's kind of why Windows decides to force reboot your computer, because there's a lot of Windows computers out there, which makes them a primary target for people looking to do mean things. So I guess, it, So where do the CVEs come from? Not everybody is just copying and pasting code off of the internet or off of Stack Overflow, although that's yet to be proven. Maybe some mystical being set up the Stack Overflow site, and that's where all the code comes from. But so in security, there is a whole bunch of different potential kind of like kinds of vulnerabilities that are out there. And when security researchers are looking at software like WordPress or whatever in-house software they have, they're looking through the code trying to find this, or they could just not even have access to the code, which is called black box testing, and they can just be poking around at it trying to find common issues that software has. I guess a lot of these come from unvalidated and untrusted inputs. So like I guess path traversal is one of the easiest ones to describe. So basically with path traversal, when you have a URL in the URL bar, like here we've got PHP, or we got /wplogin.php. So if you have some kind of misconfiguration, you might be able to, instead of typing in WP login, type in something like ... and be able to look at the parent directory. And so that's a case of, they failed to validate the input or trusted the input too much. And they're in a situation where people can actually read from directories that were higher up that, the person writing the software may have not thought was possible. Sort of the big line one that everyone is first introduced to when they're looking at security stuff is Sql injections. And basically, Sql is a language used for databases. And if you're not validating your inputs correctly, then someone, instead of putting in Jeff, they can put in special characters and escape out. So I didn't put it in here, but there's a Bobby Tables XKCD comic that you may or may not have seen. Another pretty popular one is called cross-site scripting. The best example of this is the self-retweeting tweet. So at one point there was a bug in Twitter where basically it wasn't validating the contents of a tweet. So you could just type like HTML like in the tweet, and it would just render it as if it was HTML. So that might be cool because now you can tweet stuff in like bold and italics or whatever. But there's also the issue of the script tag exists, and now people can run code in your browser. And so how this self-retweeting tweet worked is there was a script tag that had JavaScript in it that would basically click the retweet button on the tweet. And yeah, so definitely put on your tinfoil hat and never trust the users. You can also run into strange auth issues. Sometimes you can think you're secure using encryption, but someone might have broken the encryption algorithm, or if you're using a weak encryption algorithm, it might not actually help that much. And then you can also have like random bugs, like where you have some part of the code where you think they're already being checked to make sure they're authorized to do something, but they're not. I guess I keep flipping around, but what is it? Was it this one? It was this one. So in this vulnerability in WordPress, if you look at the description, it says WordPress allows remote attackers to gain privileges through direct requests to adminfooter.php. So basically, if you log into the site as an admin, it'll actually render the adminfooter.php. But how I think this vulnerability worked is instead of logging into the site as the admin, you just type in to the URL bar adminfooter.php, and now you have it. You've basically bypassed the check to make sure that you're an admin, and you can just directly interact with this admin footer. So yeah. Another related thing that, so like once you have these vulnerabilities, how do you deploy them and use them against people? And this is kind of where malware comes in. And basically, malware is just software that you don't want and doesn't have your best interest in mind, like Windows. No, I'm kidding. Malware is kind of just an umbrella term for viruses. Windows, there's some not great things that it does. And when I say it's malware, I'm mostly joking. Um, and essentially, malware usually exploits some kind of vulnerability in the operating system itself. And, like a big example of this, a big example of this is viruses. So essentially, a computer virus works just like a human virus in that it uses the victim to create copies or whatever. So a virus is kind of like you have some kind of program and it edits another program to put its code inside that program. And then when you run the other program, instead of running the virus, the other program now contains the malicious code that was in the virus. And then now the other program is infecting more programs. And there's various different variations of different kinds of malware. So one of them is Trojans, which, if you know about the Trojan horse, it seems like a program you want, but it's actually malicious. So maybe you download iTunes from some sketchy website like freeitunesdownloadlegit.com, and you download iTunes and it looks like iTunes, but it's actually like logging all of your keystrokes and stealing your credit card number. There's also spyware, which doesn't pose, it's also kind of another umbrella term, but this is, all of these terms can be kind of overlapping. But spyware essentially just like logs keystrokes and potentially steals your credit card numbers if you go and type it into a website. Adware is kind of what it sounds like. It will show you lots and lots of ads, and it might like replace the ads on other websites with their ads. And that's how they make money off of it. And the last one is like bots or remote administration tools. So like there might be some kind of payload in the virus that allows someone to control your computer remotely and turning it into a zombie and then they get armies of these zombies and have them do whatever they want. One of the biggest examples of this is for denial of service attacks. So denial of service attack is essentially you get a bunch of people to stand. If you think of a website like a building, it's kind of like a strike where you get a bunch of people to stand in front of a building and block people from entering. But instead of like strikes, usually they're trying to, get better working conditions. But for denial of service attacks, they're just trying to prevent people from using the service for whatever reason. And so the way you do this usually is by sending lots and lots of web requests to the server, essentially. So you're hogging up all the server's resources. But usually the servers are bigger than your computer, so it's hard to hog up all their resources. So what distributed denial of service attacks do is, you use some kind of virus and get a bunch of machines that you can control remotely, and then you have all of these machines hammering away at some kind of service. And this has the added benefit of being very hard to pinpoint where people are coming from. Luckily, though, there's services like Cloudflare that can help you out, and they can kind of weed out which people are kind of just maliciously accessing the website instead of actually trying to use it. So I guess that was kind of a lot of splattering at the wall. Security is kind of a very dense profession at times, and there's just a lot of stuff you got to cover, but it may take a while to grasp everything, but definitely, like, if one of these things seems interesting, or one random topic, definitely that's something that you can kind of, chase down and play around with in labs on your own computer and slowly build up knowledge about things. Another great way of getting information and understanding things is watching like conference talks from conferences like DEF CON. And if you get the YouTube algorithm trained up, it can keep suggesting you cool videos. My algorithm has broken down, and now it's just showing me the news instead of cool talks, so that's unfortunate. So once you've built up kind of general knowledge about security, and you want to get around to actually doing red team stuff and hacking into things and testing vulnerabilities, there's basically a kind of standard process for going about things. The first step in that is target discovery and kind of information gathering stage. Essentially, if this part can be very critical, because if you're only allowed to touch certain machines that belong to your company, you don't want to accidentally start scanning and attacking machines that belong to your competitor, because not only is that bad, but it may make your competitor mad and try to sue your company. So essentially, target discovery, you kind of just say, what machines or services or domains are out there that I can even look at? Like, what is inbound? And then after that, you can kind of try things like version scanning or port scanning and stuff. So like, you can use tools like Nmap, which can quickly connect, and it can see like, oh, there's a web server running on this machine, and another one might be like, oh, there's no web server running on this machine, but it has this other strange port open that's used for, like remote login or something. And you can build up all this information and then kind of try to identify, which things are high priority. And if you can find versions of things, then you can go ahead and do something like vulnerability discovery, where you go and try to find relevant known vulnerabilities. Or if you can't find any vulnerabilities, you can start analyzing a specific target and poking around to it and try to find new stuff. But a lot of the times people don't update things. And so it's likely that if you find something old, then there's probably some kind of vulnerability open on it. Then once you identify vulnerabilities, or potential vulnerabilities, you can verify them to make sure that it actually is vulnerable. And then you can also wind up, if you're allowed to, depending on what rules you're working on, you can even try to exploit them and try to put some kind of payload onto the target. So like in a demo we're going to get to later, I have a payload that allows me to remotely log in and basically run shell commands on this server. And I put a link here to this thing. This is a virtual machine. So essentially you can run a virtual computer on top of your computer that already has a whole bunch of vulnerabilities, and you can have it, safely protected behind your computer where only you can try to poke at it and have fun playing around with things. So I'll link this presentation in the chat when I'm finished up. So yeah. So I already kind of talked about this. Essentially, if you identify, we can run through kind of the process. First, we got to find targets. So say, your company has some random website, and then you can start going around and trying to gather information. Like in this case, maybe you guess and you find out, oh, this is a WordPress website. And then you see, oh, it's running whatever specific version. And you can go ahead and find some vulnerabilities. And I don't know if you can see it, but on the column all the way onto the right here, this says number of exploits here. So there's this, and there's also tools like Metasploit, where you can just enter in this magic number at the top, and then it might have a script that can automatically exploit these vulnerabilities. And then you get to say, I'm in like HackerMan. Okay, so now for the fun part. So what happened with this is I was trying to set up a specific thing with WordPress originally, but to make things even easier and clearer how this one vulnerability worked, I kind of cooked up a semi-custom example. And kind of this process of setting up lab environments to specifically test things or make it easier to test things is very useful in security, and even a lot of other things. So I have a link to a GitHub repo. With all of the code and stuff in it, and instructions on how to get it set up. But essentially this website we've got a form here to upload images to the website, basically. And if we just go to the index, I've got this default thing set up where it's just listing out the directories instead of having like an index.html page. We can even see here, like already it's saying like, oh, we got this version of Apache, which is the web server. And if we wanted to, we could go look up that version of Apache and see if there's anything specific for that. But in this case, we've also got this upload script here. So, the normal way this works is I can click like an image like this, and then it says, oh, your image has been uploaded. And then I can go into the uploads folder. And then it shows my image. In this case, it's a fun GIF. But, so this assumes that you're going to upload an image. And so, one thing you can do is just try to upload something malicious. And so this is the code for the upload script. So basically, there's that web page. Sorry. Yeah, so there's this upload.html, and that submits it to this upload.php script, which essentially takes that in and then puts it into the uploads folder. But, a critical thing here is to make sure that they're only uploading images. And so sort of towards the top, I got this check commented out here that's checking to make sure it's an image. But in this case, we can kind of assume like, oh, that part was buggy, or the programmer forgot to do that check or something. And so you can upload whatever you want, including your own code. So the code that I uploaded here, which I stole from somewhere else, is essentially, since I can do whatever I want, uploading my own code, in this example, it's essentially acting like bash or like command line, but I use it through the web browser instead. So there's a lot of gobbledygook in there, but if you squint, you'll see two things that are important. It's getting CMD from the request, and then it's handing that over to the system function. And essentially, that's just going to execute the command as if you were at your terminal and typing it into bash, and then it takes the output and then prints it out to the web page. So like the example up here, it's got the backdoor.php, and the command is cat Etsy password, which just lists out the Etsy password thing. So in this example, because it's not actually checking to make sure that it's an image, it uploaded the PHP file. So now I've got my own custom code that's on the website, since they didn't check to make sure I'm not uploading code. And we can go to the website and we get a blank page. Because the important thing is you need to pass in a command. So in this example, I pass in the command to just echo some text. And then it spits out back the response, which means the backdoor is working. And so there's lots of other things we can try here. So like there's this, here I'm doing cat varlog apache2 access.log. So if this worked, it would list out like all the different requests that have come into the web server. And there's all kinds of random stuff that I could be able to read through this script or do, or I can make more folders and stuff. But in this case, the server was configured semi okay, and it actually the user that's running the PHP script does not have access to certain things. That being said, there are certain things that I do have access to, like I can list out what stuff is in the var log folder by doing ls var log, and there's all these log files in here that I can see but I can't read. And you know an example of this potentially going bad is if if you can get this, say someone has, their code is connecting to a database and that part of the code is hidden normally. So, one thing you could do with this is go and just list out that file, and then the database, username and password and stuff is just in that file. And then you can use something like that to just connect directly to their database and do malicious things. And so let's see how we're doing on time. So that's sort of the PHP upload demo. I guess, does anyone have any questions? So I guess one thing you're probably thinking is, oh, but Mickey, you put the word mainframe in the title. And I did do that. So if you want, I can talk about a little bit about mainframes. I guess essentially a mainframe is just a big computer. So theoretically, that whole demo, that could have been running on a mainframe. And if you pretend very hard, um, you can imagine it was run on a mainframe. And mainframes are still around. They're not all from like the 70s. Like in the 90s, I think eBay's website actually ran on like two different mainframes. Now it doesn't, but it used to back in the day. And banks still use mainframes. They don't use mainframes that are from the 80s or code from like the 80s. Um, they use, modern, beefier mainframes. But, you can still see examples of these things sticking around. Like, for example, they had issues with the New Jersey unemployment system because it was written in COBOL and I think running on a mainframe. So you'd be surprised they're still around. And I guess the one thing about mainframes is, they've existed long before Linux. So, but now there's even this thing called Linux for System Z. So you can run actual Linux on mainframes now. Because if you look back at, the old mainframe operating systems like MVS, these were pre-Unix operating systems. And they get very strange, and it's not very recognizable from. There's a lot of similar concepts, but you can see like a lot of stuff is just strangely renamed. And the there still is the mainframe operating systems are still around. There's um, ZOS, and most mainframes are hidden array, so it might not be easy to access them. And ZOS is proprietary and hard to develop on. So if you really want to play around with mainframes, you can go to this website and you can just download a mainframe, just like you can download RAM, and it runs in a virtual machine, and you can play around with it.